Oh non, je m'excuse. C'est-tu Gibal ou Gilbal? Ok.
Hi everyone! Let's get ready for our last panel. Can you believe this is almost over? I'm almost sad. I hope you had a good time all weekend, and this is the closing panel. So, we have two speakers. We have Élise Desaulniers. She's the author of Manger avec sa tête et Vache à lait, which are not yet available in English, but she's hoping that Vache à lait will be
translated at some point.
Translated in English eventually, so it'll be available for English readers also. And she happens to be one of the, if not the most prominent figure of veganism in Quebec. So we're really happy to have her here to talk today. And we have Martin Gibert. He's a postdoc here at McGill University in philosophy. He studies moral philosophy, more specifically moral psychology, and how this relates to applied ethics and animal ethics. They are both co-instigators of the manifesto Les animaux ne sont pas des choses, so animals are not objects. And they have co-written the entry on carnism in the Encyclopedia of Animal and Food Ethics. So these are our two presenters, and they want to mention that this will mostly be a presentation and not necessarily a Q&A, because they're presenting studies that are not theirs.
So we don't know the answers.
They wouldn't want to have to answer. Thank you.
So, first of all, we want to thank the organizer for this event, and we are happy to be part of it. And more generally, we are happy to be part of the vegan movement in Montreal.
And we're happy.
And we are happy. I apologize in advance for my bad English. And so, today we have decided, maybe you know Dr. Greger's conference. He makes the review of the latest studies in nutrition. So we have decided to make more or less the same thing, but in not in nutrition, in animal ethics, but animal ethics applied to empirical animal ethics. So basically, we can say that animal ethics, there is two kinds. Normative animal ethics, the question is how should we treat animals? And there is also descriptive animal ethics, and here the question is more how people think we should treat animals. So now we are going to present 8 studies. They are very recent. They are from the last years. It is not the best study, but we think they are interesting. So the first one, you know that more and more people are interested in the intersectionality question. But as far as we know, there was still no empirical study in psychology about intersectionality question. So that's why I'm very excited with this first paper, and it's very recent, just few weeks ago. It has been published in the journal Personality and Individual Difference, and the authors are from the Brock University, Ontario. So they wanted to know if bias toward human outgroup were related with bias toward non-human animals. So that's the paper. So they asked students to complete 3 tests. The first one was about ethnic prejudice, and the student has to rate and answer a question about immigrant, black people, Muslim, native and aboriginal people. So they had the first rate on a scale for each participant. And then they complete a second test about speciesism with question like, do you agree with this claim? So for instance, I get upset when I see wild animal in cage at zoo. I think it is perfectly acceptable for cattle, chicken and pigs to be raised for human consumption. There is nothing wrong with killing animals for their fur to make clothes. So what about the result? But there is a correlation between ethnic prejudice and speciesism, a correlation of 0.34. But there was also a third test, a test of SDO, and SDO is for social dominance orientation. So the aim of the social dominance orientation test is to measure the desire to achieve and maintain group-based dominance and inequality amongst social groups. So there was question like, do you agree with some group of people are just more worthy than others, or no one group should dominate the society? To get ahead in life, it is sometimes necessary to step on other groups. And researchers found a strong correlation between SDO and ethnic prejudice and between SDO and speciesism. So we can say, or we have some reason to say that at a psychological level, intersectionality makes sense. And maybe the main enemy for veganism is something like the SDO social dominance orientation. And now the authors are working on to develop an interspecies model of prejudice. Yes. Conclusion. First, speciesism and ethnic prejudice are significantly interrelated because, as statistically demonstrate, attitude toward both human and non-human animal outgroup are grounded in a generalized desire for group inequality and hierarchically structured group relations.
Okay. For the one among you that have seen my speech before, this is like one of my favorite study of the past year. We all know that meat and dairy diet contribute to global warming, but what if everybody becomes vegan? What will happen? So this is the question those guys from the UK tried to answer. And what they've done is not just taking like protein, meat-based protein and vegetable-based protein and compare the GHG emission between both groups, but they took like protein groups and they made like an ugly table like this one. And by looking at studies, you see what you should never do in graphic design. And then they took those group and they applied it to real diet that people follow in the real life. So what happens when you put all of that together is that you get real diet. You cannot treat properly, but for those who want the real studies in PDF, we can email it to you after the presentation. So they took like the realistic diet that real people have in the real life, and they check for each diet, baseline being like the real omnivore diet in the UK. And then they check for a few vegetarian scenarios and a few vegan scenarios. What would be the impact on GHG emission? What would be the cost of this diet? What the amount of proteins, the amount of fat intake, and all of that. And it's interesting, like to see the scenario number 1, where if one would replace meat by cheese, well, you have a bit less CO2, which is good, but also less protein and salt. It's cheaper, but also fatter than a traditional diet, so it's a bad idea. In scenario 2, just under, if we switch to what is considered as the American vegetarian diet, the GHG increases compared to the first one because there's more imported food, but it's still better than the baseline. And the 5th scenario, the US vegan diet, so basically what most of us eat, there's a clear reduction of 23% of the GHG of the CO2. And what we see, and it's very good news, is that all those diets, all kinds of vegetarian and vegan diet, are also less expensive than the traditional diet. So in their conclusion, the author say, like they say that those complicated things, that you save on GHG emissions and all of that, but they also say that switching to a vegan diet, like if the whole UK would switch to a vegan diet, you would reduce the equivalent of 50% of the actual car fleet, which is a lot. And in total, it's a reduction of 22 to 26% of the GHG emission. So you have there a pretty strong argument for veganism for those who are interested in environmental ethics. The second study is another study I like a lot. Are PETA ads effective? Yeah. Sex sells, we all know that. The image of a sexy woman are broadly used for sell products to men, car, beer, even internet providers. And we know that those campaigns are efficient. But we also use sex to promote ethical causes. And the most obvious example is PETA. We all know their campaign. This one, in fact, was banned in Montreal, and I do believe it's a good thing. But and there's a lot of reason to be against the objectivation of women's bodies. But the real question we all wonder when we see those ads, does the end justify the mean? I mean, we know that men are less likely to support animal rights than women. So are those campaigns efficient to raise their awareness? So this team of Brisbane, Australia, did a study. In fact, they did 2 studies. In the first study, they took 82 non-veg Australian students and showed them PETA images. Some with sexy women and some without sexy women. And what happened? Well, the intent to support PETA was reduced among those who saw the woman's ad. Why? Well, because we give less credit to sexy women than to non-sexy women or to other people. So that's why I'm not sexy, because I want to be credible. So the attention is put toward their appearance and less on their agentivity, their skills, their moral status, or their mental capacities. In another study, they asked 280 people to evaluate their intent to support PETA and to give ideas to raise public awareness, to evaluate the credibility of the ads, the objectivation, all of that. And then, as you can see, the results are the same as in the first study. The non-sexualized ads are, you have more support for PETA in the non-sexualized ads. The non-sexualized ads are more credible, blah, 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 blah. So sexy women do not work to promote ethical causes, so PETA should read this study and stop using women's body.
Support donations?
Just support the cause, so say that I agree with that cause and I'm more likely to change my habits and all of that. So not giving money, just saying that I agree with the idea.
Okay, the next question, the next study is about Michael Pollan. I haven't read the Omnivore Dilemma from Michael Pollan.
I did.
Yeah?
I didn't like it.
But I have heard of it because of Elise and because it was a very well-known and it was a real success. It was in fact in the top of the 10 books of the New York Times in 2006. And in these books, Michael Pollan famously advocates for local food for organic food and for other things.
Small-scale farming.
Small-scale farming, exactly.
Human meat.
But the question is not there. The question, what was interested the researcher was not the food question. It was how reading a book can result in attitude change, and especially what about long-term effect of reading a non-fiction book. So that's the book. That's the study. Yeah, usually studies about attitude change look at the impact of a short video or a paragraph of text. But a book is, of course, very different because a book can present a long argument. It takes time to read. There are some narrative, emotional involvement, mental image. So it was interesting to ask if what kind of attitude change it bear. So the study take advantage of a reading program for freshmen at the University of Pennsylvania. So they are freshmen not from University of Pennsylvania, from the Bank of Image, but you can imagine. That was my joke, English joke. So
It works better in French, in fact.
So in 2007, every freshman of this university had to read the Omnivore Dilemma, and also to attend some lecture and to participate in group discussion. So what about the result? So here the first column is the freshmen who have written the Omnivore Dilemma, and the other one is people who haven't read the Omnivore Dilemma. And the column with the strips, it's the same people, but 1 year later. So there was question like, I believe government should not give subsidies for corn production, or I believe the American quality of food is declining. And as we can see, there is a decrease, there is a difference between people who have read and people who have not read, but one year later, there is a big decrease of the difference. So explanation from the researcher, Participants respond to the book fade from memory 1 year later. And although food habits are strong habits and they don't change easily, but there is also an exception, and it's a hope for us. So with the exception of their commitment to the environmental movement, which increased significantly during the year, reluctance to eat meat and inclination to buy local food, which remain unchanged. So people were convinced by the question of meat with the book. Agreement with individual attitude item and the composite attitude score dropped significantly over the course of 12 months after having read the book.
So you mean that like after 12 months they forget everything except for the meat and buying local?
Exactly. Yeah. So next studies, we know that to talk about a pet owner is not the same thing as to talk about a pet guardian, but what is exactly the effect of phrasing in people's attitude toward animals? And in these studies, the question is what is the effect of phrasing in people's attitude toward dogs? So it's a question of anthropomorphic frame. So participants in this study had to they saw a photo of 3 dogs, and they had to rate their degree of agreement. Oh yeah, I can. The idea. I read the quotation. Given that dehumanizing language is often associated with the mistreatment of fellow human beings, we hypothesize that the reverse might also be true, that anthropomorphic humanizing language might encourage beneficent action toward non-human. So the study, people saw image of three dogs, and half of the participants had to rate anthropomorphic trait like this dog has a good sense of humor, or this dog is a good listener, or this dog gets along with others. So that's anthropomorphic trait. And the other participants, the other half of the participants, had to rate non-anthropomorphic trait like this dog has a good sense of smell, or listen to command, or is good with other dogs. Then they saw picture of the same 3 dogs and had to rate the degree to which they would be willing to adopt the dog from an animal shelter or donate money and time to help the dog to get adopted. And this is the second column, the column of dogs. You can see that when they had rate a dog with anthropomorphic trait, they are more willing to adopt or to give money or time to the dogs on the photo than when they haven't rate anthropomorphic trait. So yes, it works. Anthropomorphism can help to help the welfare of animals. Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, no. Two hypotheses of explanation for this phenomenon. Anthropomorphism may increase the liking of non-human animal, here dogs. So it's an emotional process. Or another hypothesis, and that is that anthropomorphism may change the perception of in-group and out-group membership. So here it's more a categorization process.
So the next one, how stereotypes affect activist influence. So when we think about an activist, not us, but people in general, we do see somebody like that. And this team of Canadian psychologists examined the possibility that individuals resist social change because they have negative stereotypes of activists being the agent of social change. So they did a lot of things, but in one of the studies, they asked a participant to identify the characteristics that describe activists in two groups. The typical feminist, and the wording you will see there are pretty interesting, and the typical environmentalist. And when you look at the word there, for the feminist, you get a man-hating, lesbian, angry, and all of that, the kind of word we feminists hear a lot of time. And for the typical environmentalist, you may recognize yourself as a trigger, vegetarian, hippie, unfashionable, annoying, crazy, or irrational people. So these words were mentioned by the subject in the research as words that do describe the activist. And then we try to find the intent to follow somebody that do fit with those characteristics. And the more the profile of somebody fits with those words, the less likely we are to follow that person. So in conclusion, the authors of the study said, ironically, and despite good intention, therefore the very individual who are the most actively engaged in promoting social change may inadvertently, you know what I mean, it's written there, alienate members of the public and reduce pro-change motivation. So in other words, to encourage social change, we shouldn't look like activists, we should look like regular people. So dress well.
And not be sexy.
Yeah, not be sexy, and dress well.
To advise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it me or you?
Yeah. So yesterday, some of us were screaming, "There is no excuse for animal abuse." But of course, you know that.
Were we dressed properly?
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, you know that people have a lot of excuse. It's bad excuse, but they have a lot of excuse, and sometimes we put this excuse in a carnist or omnivore bingo, and I'm pretty sure here that everyone has experienced this kind of carnist omnivore bingo. It just means that people always respond the same thing to argument against meat consumption. So in this study from Portugal, the researcher made the pro version of the carnist bingo, and the pro version of carnist bingo is called moral disengagement. So basically, it's how to escape from anti-meat or vegan argument. So they made six focus group of omnivore, and they present them with the impact of meat on health, on environment, and on animal welfare. And they just recorded what people say on the focus group. And people say, of course, always the same thing that we know, but the aim of the study was to put this in a nice classification, to have a categorization. So they find six categories. The first category was the yes but. So yes, because yes, I recognize that there is an impact on health, on environmental, and on animal welfare, but there's a reason. So, for example, meat is necessary for surviving, is necessary for evolution, etc. The second category was yes, but there is no alternative, and here the idea was to frame the discussion in extreme stance, like when people say it's yes, but it would be too expensive to become vegan.
We know it's wrong.
And yeah, of course it's wrong. The third category was yes, but they are worth thing. We all heard that. Worth. Yeah.
Worse.
Yes. Worth.
Worse.
Worth.
Okay.
It's a worse.
Sorry. The fourth category was it's not up to me. So, and here there is a difference between health and environment. When it's about health and environment, people try to blame the mass production, but not the mass consumption, of course. And when it was about the focus group was about animal welfare, the move was more to say it's their responsibility, and their responsibility was, for instance, public government, legal sphere, education, and experts like veterinaries. The fifth category was it's not that bad. So, for instance, for health question, the argument or the excuse was today's truths are tomorrow's lie, or you just tell half of the story. And for animal welfare question, it was the classic meat is happy thanks to veterinaries and experts. And finally, the last category was it is not a real category of moral disengagement. It's another thing, and it just don't make me think about it. So, conclusion of the researcher: the expression of this disengagement mechanism seems to diffuse potential feeling of guilt and self-censure when discussing harmful but self-serving behavior mid-consumption. And and we know that information and knowledge is often not sufficient to help people consider the impact of their eating habits.
And the last study is from the Netherlands, and in this study we realized that between vegan and carnivore, there is a lot of people that do reduce their meat consumption, and their number is growing every year. So in the dark column you have the study of 2009, and in the gray column you have the study of 2011, and the horizontal line is the number of times a week you eat meat. And you see that the people who eat meat every day there is less people eating meat every day, a little bit more people being vegan, and a lot of more people skipping a day or two a week of meat eating. And the researcher wanted to understand who were these people who were starting to give up on meat and having vegetarian or vegan days. And it's pretty interesting for us activists to understand that it's not only omnivore or vegan, but there's an in-between with different motivation. And those researchers did 5 groups, and those groups are the conscientious flexitarian. So that group, they reduce their meat consumption for environmental or health reasons, and it's mostly women, 70% women. The unconscientious flexitarian, they are not interested on ethical or health reasons. They like vegetarian meals, but they do not think that meat is associated with higher social status, so they just don't care. They eat whatever it's there. And it's less educated people in that group. The extrovert flexitarian, they reduce their meat consumption just to increase their social status, because it looks good to eat vegetarian meals. They are interested in the ethical and health arguments, and they are younger than the other groups, and they are attracted to eating less meat just for social reasons, not ethical reason, like I've said earlier. I'll just repeat myself. The fourth group, the disengaged meat eaters, they do eat meat very often, but they don't hesitate to replace it on a regular basis. They don't have any particular reason to eat meat, so they would eat less meat just if the occasion would show. They are just not motivated in eating less or eating more. And finally, you have the real meat lover, mostly men, 62%, and really do not want to reduce their meat consumption. What is interesting is that on all those groups, you could have them reducing their meat consumption and move toward veganism, probably, in talking to them with the right arguments. And another thing that is interesting is that none of those people describe themselves as flexitarians. They just say they are meat eaters. It's something we should take into account when discussing with meat eaters. And I think we're done. If you want to receive those studies, just email us and we will send it back to you.
With the highlights.
Yeah. And you can ask questions, but we might not have the answer. But go ahead. How long do we have? Questions, comments? Yes?
Thank you for that compilation. Sorry that I'm speaking so much today. With the study about stereotypes of activists and appearances, I heard that come up in many contexts, and I think it's a major theme in the pretty popular advocacy book, Change of Heart by Nick
Yeah.
Whitney.
Yeah.
And I think it's important in this context where we're being critical, but also trying to be effective activists, however we understand that, to think about what we're reinforcing if we police how each other looks, in terms of lookism, but also what other dominant structures are determining whose appearance is accessible to people. It's important to keep that in mind.
Yes, you're right. It's quite a I have no answer, but I can talk from my own experience as an activist and a public speaker. It's always a challenge to decide what I will wear and just if I'm going to wear makeup or not. I mean, I feel more comfortable not wearing makeup, and but I do feel that if I wear makeup, I will look more healthier and more young and more everything. And it's always the same the same thing. If you're sick, you want to hide that you're sick because you're vegan, so you should be healthy. And I should wear skirts and high heel to show that it's not just for those crazy tree huggers, and it's for everybody. But it's a real challenge, and I think it really depends of who you're talking to, in what context, and what you're trying to achieve, and that in your talk you need to underline all those issues you're facing. But yes?
Thank you. This strikes me as incredibly helpful. It's great. So I just have a really quick practical question, a narrow question, and a broad question. So the broad question is, how do you think that these, how do you think that these should inform advocacy, and should they have us be more receptive to commitment to certain theories as well? So to theoretical commitments also follow this as well, practical commitments. And then the narrow question is just, did you see anything about documentaries, particularly those, or really just the study of graphic images? That's something that's come up a few times.
The efficiency of graphic images?
Yeah.
No. But we don't know. It's a bit random. Because a lot of studies are from psychology. When you see one studies, you can have the reference for the other, but maybe there is someone in Sweden that makes this kind of studies.
But if it's not published in English or in French, we won't see it.
Yeah,
so that's a problem. But I do try, and for those who follow me on Facebook or Twitter, I do try to read everything that is published, and that's quite a challenge to sleep at the same time. But that's another story. And I haven't seen anything, but it's something we should really test. And the only book on that topic on what is efficient is not the social change that you mentioned. And it's not that complete. But
there is really an emerging field of study in moral psychology about this kind of question, but it's really new. Maybe there is 3 or 4 studies like the first one I present about intersectionality in psychology.
And you should do like a research on the efficiency of what I wear in my
Yeah,
talks.
yeah.
The impact on the social change.
We'll
Yes.
have one more question. if that's okay.
Oh, well, I wanted to ask you a question about your table 3. You know, where you have all those particular choices or answers.
In what study?
Table 3?
Table 3.
Table 3 in what study? Not this,
This
one?
one?
No. There's a whole long list of rationales given.
Ah, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
It's
So ask your question, maybe I remember.
Okay. Well,
The bingo. The bingo, yeah.
Okay, in that particular survey, were people actually asked to choose those particular categories?
It
Or
wasn't.
is it based on an open-ended question where you categorize the responses?
It wasn't a survey. It was a focus group. So people were speaking freely, and they were recorded. And after that, the researcher heard the record and tried to make categories. So it wasn't a survey. It's really the researcher who makes the category after when hearing the people.
No, but if you look at those particular rationales,
Yeah.
you think it's possible that you know that the actual culture of killing and eating animals, you know, is really the primary factor and not the specific categories into which the responses are analyzed.
Yeah, it's not a real rationale. It's just excuse. But what is interesting is that it's always the same excuse that people are saying, but it's not, of course, a real argument. And I'm not sure I respond clearly to your question.
Just to come back on your question on the way we dress and all that, I remember I had like a quick discussion about this topic with Melanie Joy, who does like her life is doing public talks on carnism awareness. And it would be really, really interesting to push that reflection further with other male and female activists to just to think about it together and to be more conscious about the choices we make and the broader impact it can have on feminism issues and yeah. So good topic.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Le prochain, c'est Frédéric. Je vais lui loader ça.
He's interested in political philosophy and animal rights. He did his master's at Université de Montréal. And he has a blog which you can follow him on. It's in French, but that's a great opportunity to learn French and then follow him on his French blog. And I think his voice is a bit low today, so...
Yeah, I have a sore throat.
Welcome, Frédéric.
Thank you. And where should I sit? Okay, I'll start. So, hi everyone, and hi to the people on the web following the streaming. So I'm not so sure I took Martin and Elyse's advice about what to dress. I try to dress nice, but you're already convinced, and you are probably more activist than the general public. So maybe I should have wear activist clothes. I'm not sure. I try to dress nice, maybe too nice in the opposite direction. Okay, so I want to apologize in advance. My talk is going to be very theoretical about political philosophy. So if you're not familiar with political philosophy, please raise your hand and say what you don't understand. I'll try to define the concepts of the words that I'm using. Okay, so if you're a political philosopher and you take a look on the ongoing debates in animal rights for the first time, you might have the impression that most animal ethicists are libertarians. And the reason why is that most of the talks are about negative rights. We should not harm animals, we should not kill them, we should not make them suffer. But we have almost nothing to say about positive rights, positive duties that we have towards animals. That might be a problem because animal ethicists are in general anti-speciesist, so would they endorse libertarianism as well for humans? I don't think so. And when we think about it, we also strongly believe that we have some positive duties for animals in general, as feeding them or taking care of them, not just not harming them. So in the last couple of years, there has been really interesting, fantastic work being done in animal ethics to kind of balance the debate in favor of some more positive duties to animals. And in my talk, I want to focus on a specific kind of positive duties we would have towards animals, which would be distributive justice. So if you're not familiar with what distributive justice is, it's the debates about how we should use public resources or public funds to distribute them among the society. What's the metric? What's the principles we should use? For example, if you're on one side of the spectrum, if you're a libertarian, you would say we should not distribute just funds or resources at all. We all have our own stuff, we believe in private property, and that's all. And if you're in the opposite direction, you might be a Marxist who say that we should abolish private property and we should have all in common, except maybe toothbrush and underwears and stuff like that. We should probably not share, but apart of that, we should all have the resources in common. And in between libertarians and Marxists, there are many, many different political theories of different kinds of equalities. So I'm going to be focusing on two of them, and I'm not going to talk about John Rawls' justice as fairness or Martin Nussbaum theory of capabilities. But I'll be talking about equality of welfare and equality of resources, and what would it entail for animals if we are that kind of egalitarian? What would it mean for animal justice? And I'm going to be focusing on domesticated animals, not because I don't think we have positive duties to other kinds of animals as wild animals or liminal animals, but it might be a simpler case just to start. Maybe we'll find afterwards what kind would it entail for different kinds of animals. And there's also the practical reasons, because in political theory we like to start with the idea of a closed society and how people in that society should distribute resources. Let's start with this. But of course, if you're a cosmopolitan, you don't believe in the boundaries of the states, you would say that that's arbitrary to just take a few of them, and why not distribute resources to everyone?
Could I ask you about domestic? Do you mean house pets or including factory bred animals?
All domesticated animals.
So that includes factory animals?
Obviously. That's very important. A very good point. Thank you. So the outline of my presentations, first I'm going to start with to explain what's the framework I'm using. Then I'm going to provide two arguments why domesticated animals, or DA as I write on the presentation, why should they be included in our schemes of distributive justice. And then I'm going to talk about equality of resources, equality of welfare, and then I think it's an interesting debate, interesting issue about the contribution. So the framework I'm using, so it's my supervisor and his wife who wrote a fantastic book. It's called Zoopolis. I'm going to start with the idea and try to build on it. So what do they claim? First, we probably all agree we will endorse anti-speciesism and universal basic rights for all sentient animals. Not only domesticated animals, but everyone as well. And that might be more contested because I know I'm in front of a crowd of people of critical animal studies, and in general, people in critical animal studies are more closely to being against the state. And I know that's a real problem if I'm going to present you a liberal theory of justice, you might already have a lot of skepticisms. Maybe we'll talk about it at the end. But just to make sure, I don't think that's enough to dismiss the point I'm making. Because first, liberal theory is not always about state powers or state interventions. We're talking about the basic structure of society. So maybe we could find other ways to build our principles without using the states. As long as the outcome is the same, I don't really mind. So we can also, there's another thinker who would say we should also think of the social ethos, how citizens react and engage between them. That's also a justice issue. And then at the end, I'm going to take for granted that domesticated animals should be seen as co-citizens, as equal citizens. Unfortunately, I'm not going to explain right away why it's a good idea, but throughout my presentation, you might have a better idea of what I mean by that. Okay, and by the way, even if you don't believe in that idea of citizenship for animals, for example, if you're an abolitionist like Francione, you might still be interested in what I'm saying, because you would also have some positive duties for domesticated animals as they are now. Even if we believe we should stop bringing them into existence, we still have duties at the moment for the animals we foster. We should have principles regulating how should we invest some resources for them. So, the first argument, why we should include animals in distributive justice. So we've probably really heard a lot, some people saying we should not grant animal rights, because if we do, they cannot frame the social contract, they cannot enter with you in a moral debate, they cannot reflect with you, they cannot respect social norms. Therefore, we don't have to respect them. I think it's a big fallacy. But that doesn't mean the social contract theory is not useful for animal rights. There's another very interesting book. It's called Animal Rights, Moral Theory and Practice. There's a good chapter on this book by Mark Rowland, who presents a contractarian theory of animal rights. So first, he draws a distinction between two forms of contractarianism. The first one draws from Thomas Hobbes, which implies that there's no moral constraint prior to or outside of the social contract. Everything is being bargained with the social contract. But there's another family of social contract theories, which is derived from Kant, which it uses the social contract theory as a heuristic device to reach impartiality in bargaining the social contract. And I don't think I have to convince you that Thomas Hobbes' theory is not very interesting for our purposes, because you cannot secure any rights at all for sure intrinsically, because everything is bargained. And usually it can be summarized by it's the power of the strongest. The more powers you have, the more you can make some people apply to your norms. Of course, all the society has also some powers to push on the strongest, but still we're always talking about forces, real physical forces, and not about forces of the arguments. So it might be useful as a real politic theory, but I don't see any reason to endorse it as a moral theory. Okay, so if you recall, if you've seen John Rawls' work, he says that we don't have any duties of justice for animals, but because they cannot be, they cannot be part of the social contract process. But that's a big problem. And what Rowlands tried to argue is that in Rawls' theory, we find a Kantian core surrounded by unexpurgated, unfortunate, and unnecessary elements of obscenism. So what he means by that is the Kantian elements in Rawls' theory are the most fundamental of his theory, and we can get rid of all the rest, the obscene remnants. So if you recall, what is central in Rawls' theory is the veil of ignorance. Does everybody knows what's the veil of ignorance? Maybe I'll try to explain very quickly. Is that he says when we try to think of the basic principle of justice in our society, we should forget everything that makes us particular, every personal characteristics that we hold. For example, we should forget whether we are a man or woman, what gender we are, what race we are, what are our personal talents, skills, and whether we are in a high social class or in a low income class. We should forget about everything. And Rowland says if you're really consistent using the veil of ignorance, you should also include behind the veil of ignorance the ignorance of your own species membership. You should ignore whether you're a moral agent and whether you have rationality and you can discuss with other people. Those are morally arbitrary characteristics. And therefore, animals can be included in justice because the framers of the social contract will have to forget that they are part of the human species. You have to design principles of justice for every sentient beings. There will be a lot more to say about it, but I think you're probably convinced for now. The second one is really more straightforward. We start with the basic descriptive fact. Domesticated animals are already part of our society, and moreover, they have been brought here by us. And second, they already contribute to our society by their labor and by providing products. Unfortunately, at this moment, it's done in the worst way possible by violating all their liberties and all their rights. Of course, it's a really big problem, but still is the fact that they are exploited. And what does it entail from the normative perspective? If you are being exploited by someone, that's a form of slavery. If you have been brought from some people into our society and you work for our society, it would be slavery if we don't recognize you as a co-citizen, as an equal member of our society. So the capacity for cooperation is sufficient to become a citizen from the perspective of most political philosophers. And also being part of society by birth or immigration is sufficient to become a member of it. That's almost universally accepted for humans in political philosophy. So why not use the same principles to argue for the inclusion of domesticated animals? And in the book Zoopolis, Donaldson and Kimlicka they try to reformulate, reinterpret 3 Rosen criteria. I'm not going to go through them in details, but just quickly you can read them. You need to have a subjective good and be able to communicate it in some way. You need to have the capacity to comply with social norms, as many domesticated animals usually can because they've been domesticated. That's why we always relate to them and we're able to work with them. And third, the capacity to participate in the co-authoring of the laws. I'm not going to explain them in detail, so if you have any questions at the end, that would be great. Going back to my outline, now I'm going to talk about that we can agree that domesticated animals should be brought into the debates of distributive justice. What would it entail? So first, someone could say, okay, I agree with you, but that doesn't mean we have strong duties of justice for them. Maybe sufficientarism would be enough. That means that we should only provide for their basic needs, and that's all. We should just feed them, make them walk outside, and if they are finally healed, we're going to take care of them, but that's all. And the humans would enjoy the resources they have. If you are a sufficientarist for humans, I'm not going to talk to you about why I don't agree with it, but I don't think most people endorse the theory in the human case. And that's a real problem if they don't agree with it for the animals then. So as Donaldson and Kimlicka said in their book, it is measured in terms of an egalitarian vision of the social community, and when we bring new people into the community via birth or immigration, we must allow them to become full members and not condemn them to permanent second-class status. Why should the standard be different for animals whom we bring into our community? So, we should not endorse. Robert Nozick famously said we should be cautious of being Kenshin for humans and utilitarian for animals. I think that's the same problem. We should not be egalitarian for humans and then sufficientarist for animals. That would be a big fallacy, a big problem. We would bring them into a second-class society or a system of caste. So I'm going to talk about 2 kinds of egalitarian theories. The first one is equality of resources. What is it? It starts with the principle that resources should be distributed equally to all members of the society, but we are all responsible for how we use those resources. So if I want to use the money I've received by the state for my leisure time to buy some video games, that's only my concern. Some other people would like to invest it, and we can do whatever we want. However, we are compensated if we're having some brute luck. What we mean by that is sometimes there are some problems that happen to you that you're not responsible of. For example, if you're falling ill, you have difficult disease, now it's going to be the burden of the state to take care of you because they're not responsible for what happened to you. But if you made some bad decisions where you knew the odds of failing, that was going to be your problem. For example, if you go to the casino and you bet and you lose all your money, unfortunately you knew you could lose your money, so you will be responsible for it. So can we include domesticated animals in this scheme of equality of resources? One straightforward objection would be, well, animals can't use resources, so that doesn't make any sense to say that we should give equal resources to them. They cannot use money, they cannot bargain stuff at the market. But I don't think that's a very serious objection. I don't think that being able to use money and have a bank account is a requirement for being included in distributive justice. And we have other examples of humans who can have resources, and we use resources on the behalf of them, for example, children or people with disabilities. But another more interesting problem with it is what I call the problem of inexpensive tastes or needs. I will take them to be the same. There might be a problem if we have some citizens that really don't need a lot to thrive, then would receive the same. And the other side, we have other people in our societies that could use those resources in a better way to flourish. For example, if you are a parent of a small family, you have 2 children, are you going to use the same money for any of them regardless of what you can do with those resources? For example, you have one of them who really wants to play video games, that's fine, but are you going to spend all the money on these children, not half of your money for these children, while the other one is sick and needs, for example, he cannot walk, so he needs something to walk. Of course, we have the intuition that we should spend more money on the disabled child. Usually, there's a problem in the equality of resources. There's an argument against equality of welfare when they say it's called the problem of expensive taste. It's been an argument raised against equality of welfare. Is why would you also simply use money, public resources, in regarding to welfare, where some people really need too much and they're going for wrong reasons. For example, they use, for example, some people might have taste of eating caviar, and caviar costs a lot. I'm not going to use that example in front of you for obvious reasons, but we could think of another example as doing surf or doing golf. That's why should the public, our society, funds those tastes of those who needs to play golf to be happy. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to go back to the problem of inexpensive taste. That might be contested, but I have the intuition that animals do not need a lot of resources to thrive. Basically, they need good food. They need some space to move around. That probably is going to be the most expensive, is to design public spaces to have them some territory to use. And they might fall sick once in a while, but in general, I think human health looks like it costs a lot more. The activities we're trying to do to get away from boredom or doing some high education, that costs a lot. So I think at the moment, being a human is more expensive than being a non-human. And that would be a problem if we just spend the same amount of resources for everyone. So how can a resource egalitarian reply to this? By the way, how long do I have left? Can someone tell me?
7 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to go real fast. 6. It's 5 now. I'll do my best. Okay, so they have basically 2 answers when they talk about people with disabilities. They try to find a way to explain, to justify why we should give more resources to people with disabilities. So if we look at this, maybe we'll find a way to give less resources to people with inexpensive taste. So the first strategy they can say, is I already forgotten what it is that okay, it's based on the insurance system that equality of resources endorses. It's very complicated. I'm not going into details, but in general, you say you don't know if you're going to be disabled or not, so you would buy an insurance, and if you become disabled, the society will provide for all the needs, all the health costs and stuff like that. So in a similar way, could we say you don't know if you're going to have expensive taste or not, so you would put some money aside in insurance schemes and redistribute them to people with expensive taste, or less inexpensive, more inexpensive. Anyway, you get what I mean. But I don't think it's really a good answer. And why is it again? First, it depends. The success of the strategy depends on how many people would have inexpensive taste. And anyway, maybe you will ask me questions about it. I'm not so sure I can explain it well at the moment. Another strategy a resource egalitarian could use is to treat talents and skills as resources. For example, I have 2 legs and that allows me to do a lot of stuff, and some people don't have those legs to walk every day, so they are kind of deprived of something. We could say that both my 2 legs are a form of resource that I can use every day to use something, and then people who don't have it could have something else to compensate for this disability. So can we say that having more expensive tastes or being a human is a problem, and animals would be more skilled in that way? I think that's pretty strange way, counterintuitive way to put it. For example, yes, animals can fly. Some of them they can swim long time in the sea, but we don't really see it as a disadvantage per se. And we also have thumbs that they don't have, and that allows us to do a lot of stuff. So in some sense, we do have a lot of skills that they don't. We also have mental powers that they cannot use in the same way, at least. And maybe the only way we'd be disadvantaged would be in our ability to convert resources into welfare. Maybe humans need more resources to be happy, and animals need less to be happy. But if we are using that argument, we are really in the direction of equality of welfare, and there's no point of being equality of resources anymore. So that's why I'm going to talk about the second one. So the theory is resources are to be distributed according that everyone benefits of an equal opportunity to flourish. And by the way, that doesn't mean equality of welfare that we are welfarists. Of course, we are in the liberal theory of justice, and we believe in basic universal rights. We're not going to sacrifice some people for the sake of other ones. What we're doing, if we sacrifice some people, we're sacrificing the best stuff in order for the worst stuff to flourish. That's the kind of thing we're going to do. So it's not utilitarianism more than that. Okay, but what would be the problem of endorsing equality of welfare for domesticated animals? I don't think they are very fundamental problems. They are just challenges, basically the same challenges that we face in the human case. They are more complex, that's all. The first one would be interpersonal comparison. How do we compare the welfare of a human enjoying classical music to the welfare of an animal just bathing in the sun, enjoying his time? That will be a difficult question, but I don't think it's an obstacle, a never-ending obstacle. I think we could find some ways of assessing and balancing those considerations. The second problem is to some welfare egalitarians list a list of objective goods that some humans need in order to flourish, and we could maybe, like Martin Nussbaum does, make a similar list of objective goods for non-human animals. And one problem I see with it, we have to be really cautious on not putting human goods or human needs in priority to the to non-human animals' needs. So when I go back to my example, I don't think that per se enjoying classical music is more valuable than bathing in the sun. And we'll have to be really cautious when we're going to spend public resources for all the citizens, including animals, that we do not make more give more importance to human pleasures and human leisures. But apart of that, I think I really like this form of equality of welfare for animals. That's if those problems can be addressed. Thank you. 2 minutes now. If those problems can be addressed, that would be very interesting. So another problem we should tackle is the problem of contribution. So going back to something I said earlier, some people will say animals can contribute to our society, so why are we giving them resources that we have? But of course that's a fallacy, because at the moment we are exploiting them, we are eating them as a society, so we are using what they do give to us. And so our animals' contribution is forced and violates all their basic rights. But can we think of other ways of doing it? Can they still contribute to our society if they are recognized as co-members with universal basic rights? Of course, you might be very skeptic about the idea of animals' contribution to our society. please, I'm really aware of these problems and I really share those concerns, but let's just talk about the theory. If animals contribute at all if our society, it must be consistent with their flourishing, and sometimes being able to contribute to a society is a form of flourishing per se. When we do work, sometimes when we do a work we like, it allows us to flourish as well. And of course, if animals were to work for society, we must benefit at least the same rights and enjoy the same working conditions than humans. But we may also think of more rights to domesticated animals workforce than human rights because of the problem of domination, of the inability to speak as a group, as an organized group for themselves. So because of this, we might want to push to add more side constraints and stuff like that to make sure there's no domination at all. But what I think it's the end. Okay, I'm finishing. Thank you. So what's very interesting, we should stop looking at contribution. I think there's a lot of people see that you have to work, or to start a business to make some money, and then you're going to pay taxes, and that's how you're a good citizen. I think that's a very, very narrow way to see how we contribute to our society. I think including animals in the schemes of distributive justice allows us to see many forms of contribution to our society. So if we believe in equality of welfare, then welfare becomes the currency of our society. Everything that contributes to the flourishing of our co-members is a contribution to our society. So we should acknowledge forms of, and encourage also forms of contribution like volunteer work. Being an activist is also a form of contribution for society. Taking care of vulnerable people, playing with children, anything that makes other citizens more happy is a contribution. And I think animals can do that very well. And that's most of the reasons why people have domestic animals, is because they make us happy. So if we take that, if we understand my argument, animals are contributing in our society if they just make us happy, if you like petting them and be with them. So in conclusion, since I've already finished, thinking of domesticated animals as co-citizens enables a reinterpretation of political concepts such as community, citizenship, cooperation, contribution, and there would be much more. And as I said, it seems to me that equality of welfare is the distributive justice theory that suits the best the interests of both humans and domesticated animals. Contribution is not required, but it can take various forms according to the flourishing of the citizens. It's not a requirement for people to receive the social welfare or social benefits that they do contribute, but we should encourage various forms of contributing. So if you take a look at my two last lines, you might think that it looks similar to this one. Does anybody recognize it? From each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So do you know where that come from? Marx, thank you. So I think it's very funny that I haven't spoken a word about Marx throughout my presentation, and I arrive at the same conclusion. What a coincidence, isn't it? And I think that's what the inclusion of domesticated animals allows us to see. And to finish on another line from myself, I'm using an expression that is being used by a lot of political philosophers who are in the Hobbesian contract theory, who talk about mutual advantage, and I want to tell them there's mutual advantage when there's mutual flourishing. That's what we should encourage everyone to flourish by, according to everyone is flourishing. So thank you very much for listening.
We'll have to limit the Q&A questions. 2 questions. Is there any questions?
She can ask me later about it.
Okay. So I was going to ask you about contribution. So I mean, that in some ways, when people present that word, it seems to be a bit disingenuous, right? Because even in cases where citizens are not able to contribute, we still think that they're owed the same protections that other contributing citizens observe. And so I'm just, I mean, obviously I agree with, that I agree with with the possibility and desirability of having animals seen as contributing members to society. But I'm wondering, so do you think this is a real problem for distributive justice, or do you think that, or do you think that it's just that we have to say something about it because otherwise it's a potential weak spot? Because I mean, obviously we have these responses in place from disability theory.
Exactly. But in the same sense, in disability theories, there are some work being done that we see them as co-contributors to our society as well. Just a contribution that we are not, at the moment with our political theories, don't acknowledge because we have a very narrow view of what is contribution. But yes, I think we have to work on both sides. On the one side, to say that's not a requirement, we can be a passive citizens without contributing to our society, and we're still owed some justice. On the other hand, we should also do some work to see that we are some people who are not seen as contributors do in fact contribute a lot to our societies. So that's how I see it. So I agree completely with your comment. And you had something to say, I don't say in one else.
I very much how you point out that the veil of ignorance obviously usually kind of quarantines the arbitrariness of species as something that should be taken as relevant. And in fact, a lot of lucky egalitarians who put point of moral privilege on birthplaces being arbitrary don't also.
Yeah, exactly. I'm aware of that.
So yeah, so I appreciate you pointing that out. I'm just wondering, how are other have you presented this work to other like conferences?
Not yet. It's my first experience,
Okay.
but I will try to work more again and present it elsewhere. I have a lot more things to say, but I didn't have the time to present it
I'm
again.
just trying to think of how they're going to resist. You know,
How to find ways to.
find
Yeah,
ways
where
to-
there's
because
one.
that's- yeah.
There's one animal ethicist whose name is Robert Garner. It's a very, very interesting guy because he's on our side, but he doesn't agree with most of what we say. And on this issue, he says it's not convincing because we all have our biases about how to use the veil of ignorance. Everyone will use it the way he wants it to frame it. And it had been an argument against John Rawls that he just imagined a thought experiment to suit his purposes. And Garner fears that we would use the veil of ignorance in the same fashion. But I don't think it's a very convincing argument because it's very conservative. So if we were to go back in the slavery era and asking people, imagine if you were a slave, and he would say, no, we cannot use that because slaves are not part of our society. No, you would argue to them that's arbitrary the way you see it. We should think of yourselves as any places you could be. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Frédéric.
Thank you very much.
Our next and last presenter is from Guelph, Ontario. His name is Mike Nicholson. He's a student in the Masters of Criminology at the University of Guelph. He is studying the Canadian criminal justice system and the 1976 abolition of capital punishment. As an activist, Mike has co-founded a grassroots anti-slaughterhouse collective called Guelph Pig Say. As well, he has co-founded Animal Liberation Ontario, an online resource that has now organized 2 conferences on the intersectionality of oppression, covering issues including animal liberation, patriarchy, racism, queer liberation, indigenous solidarity, disability politics, environmental justice, and prisoners' rights. Mike lives with 2 dogs, Rufus and Phoebe, and a cat named Cleopatra. Welcome, Mike.
This one? Okay, is this good? Yeah? Okay. Thank you for the invitation to speak. Let me... So this presentation is going to be just to summarize it, it's going to be covering what I believe is it's a corrupt conceptualization of justice in mainstream society and within the animal rights movement. Yeah, the idea that our version of justice has been corrupted, and that we need to first address that and move towards a more sustainable and holistic version of what justice is. And introducing the concept of transformative justice will be a way to effectively do that and actually bring liberation totally for humans and non-humans. So just to begin, I think it's important to recognize that this conference, it's happening on land that was traditionally occupied by the people of Kanien'kehá:ka. And so this information, it's relevant because this is a conference about rights and about liberation. So we have to be aware that, when we're having these conversations, it's on territory that has been taken by colonization, and that this is relevant to how we go about campaigning for the rights of others and against oppression. And land acknowledgements like these, again, they're not in past tense, it's ongoing processes, so we have to just be aware of that. Okay, so defining justice, just to begin. So just imagine for yourself how you think about the criminal justice system. So that would be the police, the courts, and the prisons. Just think of some adjectives, some ideas in your head of what that represents to you. And from there, just imagine what the idea of justice is to you. So in your head, when you think of justice, what are we trying to accomplish? So we're why are we here? What are we striving towards? As well, just recall a time where you remember the experiencing harm. Just any time where you have been on the side of the victim. And also consider a time when you yourself have done harm. So the point of those last two questions or statements is just to emphasize that we all create harm. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional, but just the idea that we're all shifting in roles of oppressor and oppressed, and so it's important to just remember that when we're trying to talk about liberation, that it's we all create harm in different degrees. So with those realizations, it's important to approach these conversations and others that with humility, patience, intention, just good values to keep. And I thought it was a good quote from Malcolm X, just saying, don't be in such a hurry to condemn a person because they do not do what you do or think as you think. There was a time when you don't know what you know today. So it's just important to just maintain that kind of humility and patience and open-mindedness. Okay, so retributive justice. So this is the corrupt version of justice that I mentioned earlier. So retribution. So the system of retributive justice is what we currently live under in Canada. So it's the Canadian criminal justice system. And so the idea with retribution is that it's punitive justice. So we think when there's crimes, when there's harms committed, we label them as crimes, and then the people who do those are considered criminals, rule breakers, those types of labels. And we think the solution to this is to bring punishment to those people. And so this system is manifested in institutions, practices, policies, and attitudes for addressing social harm. And so it's often labeled as a way of law and order, but I'll just be presenting it to show that it's really about sustaining the status quo system. So the principles of retributive justice, again, is pretty simply that punishment can bring justice. So harm is therefore interpreted according to the law. So if there's laws that are broken, that's considered harm. And so that's why it can be really difficult to be articulating for animal rights, because there's not really laws very good laws anyway that express that. So it's very hard for people to kind of get out of that mindset of not needing a law or a policy to tell them that there's been harm committed. And so with these institutions, that's where we get the police, the courts, and the prisons. So in practice, what happens is that we have a massive, the Canadian Criminal Code is a very thick book of just lists of punishments. And so this ranged from fines to sex offender lists to prisons to execution in the United States still in varying states. Canada abolished capital punishment in 1976, and that's what I've been looking at with my master's research. And so with this, the government and these institutions have really normalized the system of retribution. So now it's almost unquestioned to think of punishment can bring justice, and justice comes from punishment. So they've really normalized this as the primary or only way to resolve disputes, resolve harm. But again, with this comes these status quo factors of social order, economic prosperity, and a lot of dominant norms and values such as nationalism, privilege. A lot of these values are reinforced through the retributive system. And again, in results, so what I've said before, our version of harm and how we can articulate that, it's very limited. With the retributive system, we focus almost entirely on the perpetrators, so it's the criminals. When there's harm committed, we look to them and focus attention on them. And again, it's justice through punishment, so that's just really driving that home. So relating this to animal justice and animal liberation. So the Canadian Criminal Code, sections 444 to 447. So it's has only had minor amendments since 1892, so a very long time ago. So when you're talking about crimes to animals, it's listed under the property clauses. So it's animals are considered property, and so with these provisions, the wording in them, it's extremely problematic for a lot of reasons. But the ideas of harm, again, it's very narrowly defined. The wording of willful neglect, unnecessary harm, those kind of things, it's extremely flexible. So when there has been really egregious cases of animal cruelty, the perpetrators can get off because the courts largely will say, well, it's been necessary harm, or because these perpetrators are property owners, it's considered completely different from an actual more criminal act. And then the role of capitalism for influencing the retributive system. So within these provisions, the punishments vary according to the capital value of the animal. So working animals, as they're called, the farming cattle, they have a higher penalty if you commit cruelty towards them because of their economic value. So every other animal that's not within the working version, their punishments are far less. So again, it's a very corrupted version of justice where we say, because of how much they can contribute, how much we can exploit them, you should be punished more because you hurt them. So again, just asking ourselves why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. Is our goal to really punish animal abusers? And I think it's important as we're talking about these things with those values of humility in committing harm. This is, I think, a really great quote from Nelson Mandela that he wrote while in prison. Maybe you can just read it yourself, so I don't have to say all of it. But the key point that I think there is, it's about liberating the oppressor as much as the oppressed. So it's not a conditional thing where we can liberate oppressed peoples and not liberate the oppressors. It's one struggle, one end goal. As well, I think. A really nice quote from Audre Lorde, black feminist, explaining just because our shackles are different, or shackles of oppression, they're different, we might not recognize them always, they're still shackles. So just because people are in different situations, coming from different spaces, it's important just to remember these differences don't mean it's not still oppression. So going into that, another big result of the retributive system is the prison industrial complex in Canada. So the idea with the prisons is, again, taking the perpetrators out of the community and changing the perpetrator and not the community. So the blame is put onto the perpetrator as somehow the deviant that needs to be fixed before they can be reintegrated. So with this model, there's now over 15,000 people in Canadian prisons. And so it's the highest ever as crime rates continue in the last 2 decades to decrease. And with this growing prison population, it's increased for visible minorities. 75% in the last decade have went up. With that, the current prison population is nearly 25% Indigenous peoples within that system. So they only make up 4% of the national population, but they're 25% in the prison system. So again, it's just really mind-boggling to think about these things and think that this is going to be a source of justice or liberation as we're trying to move forward. Another great quote, Angela Davis, where she says that, again, jails and prisons, they're not about reforming, about rehabilitation. They're really about just breaking people harder. People who have committed really egregious acts of harm, breaking them harder. And she, compares it to the zoos, where it's making them obedient to their masters. And again, we have to ask ourselves if we're is that really what we're trying to accomplish when we're promoting animal rights, animal liberation? Is it these kind of systems that we want to rely on and turn to? So going with these ideas, the really problematic system of prisons, Green is the New Red by Will Potter. So again, the increasing criminalization of animal rights activists. That's a quote where their animal rights is becoming increasingly criminalized and repressed. So again, it's the prison system that's trying to oppress and deter animal rights activism. But again, in a lot of our animal activism, we see a lot of strategies that appeal to the prison system. So I don't know if anyone's heard these kind of chants at protests and whatnot, where we're demanding people to leave town. But again, it's the same mentality of the prison system, where we're trying to alienate, we're trying to stigmatize, and take perpetrators out of our communities, when it's not really addressing the harm and why they're there, and how we can actually improve our communities without just isolating what we consider the problem. So you can just see some images here I just took where it's again just promoting these things. So it's this idea that it's an animal abuser, and that's supposed to be justice, is someone in handcuffs. This is taken out of protest that was on CBC, the image. So again, just promoting that, well, some people deserve to be in cages is kind of what this sign is saying. And a lot of these things online where it's saying that it can be appropriate to do experimentation on certain peoples in our communities. It just depends on the criteria. So again, we have to be really critical of what we're trying to say. Are we against saying that animal experimentation is really wrong? Or are we against the ideas that saying that it's okay to dominate someone and to do awful scientific experiments on someone? That's a T-shirt for some reason. And just another really common strategy that kind of plays into the retributive model is undercover documentations at factory farms and farms. So again, it's pretty common, like an organization, Mercy for Animals, has become more well known for doing this. So again, what they do is they go undercover into these farms with cameras, and then they'll document a really awful examples of animal abuse happening at these farms. So an example is the Butterball in North Carolina in 2012. And so it was awful footage, and as a result, the North Carolina officials raided and arrested several employees. And so as the Mercy for Animals blog promoted it, it's making history. We're getting federal convictions of people who are abusing animals, as if this is progress, as if this is something to celebrate. But in reality, so those are the 6 workers. So you can see extremely racialized people socially disempowered for having to be working at these places. And again, we have to ask ourselves, like, what are we really accomplishing when we're arresting a few workers who are already, again, socially disempowered? We're enabling and furthering that kind of oppression. There's lots of literature that link marginalization with contact with criminal justice systems. So, when we're trying to promote animal rights, are we really just perpetuating these kinds of really awful relationships of saying people of lower status in the social hierarchy are going to be more likely to be targeted by the retributive model? And again, like, does anything really change with these models? Okay. So again, asking ourselves, is this how we imagine justice? So now, going with a transformative justice model. So the background is that it's come from Ruth Morris, largely a Quaker in Canada, that's critiquing the system. And she suggested how it's been really inadequate responses to what's going on. And it's grown largely as a movement to abolish the prison industrial complex. And so its process, what it says is that harm it's an occurrence that comes from deeper roots of oppression. So if we want to address the harm that has happened, we have to look at the deeper roots of it. So that can be racism, classism, variety of others, and speciesism. So instead of ignoring that and perpetuating these cycles of oppression, we have to recognize the roots and really address that. So in practice, there's a variety of ways of doing this, but essentially it's anything that's promoting an alternative to the criminal justice system, the retributive model, a way that promotes community growth, community capacity to deal with this independently without relying on these state forces. Examples, Generation 5. So it's a national anti-violence organization, so they work with trying to end child sexual abuse in 5 generations. So it's extremely intense topic, and they're trying to resolve this through transformative justice. And again, they really stress that they can't do this without recognizing the other systems of oppression at play that contribute to child sexual abuse. So again, individual justice and collective liberation are connected. Another great one is Philly Stands Up. And so they are taking on, they work with perpetrators of sexual assault using community accountability models. And so they hold the perpetrators accountable, but they try to use means that actually promote healing for the community instead of just pushing away and turning to repressive models of justice. So the results of the transformative model is, again, that harm is defined by the community. So it's local to what's going on in that community and how we try to understand it. And again, they see harm as coming from deeper roots that need to be addressed if we really want to change something. So applying it to animal liberation. So veganism, I'll just go over this briefly just for time constraints. Veganism, I would say, is largely focused on negative rights of do no harm. So it's trying to promote social change through capitalism, through consumerism, which are, I would say, like very oppressive, restricting models of social change. So within the vegan consumerism, they're still going to be running on oil-based market system, which is awful for the planet, and the vegetables that are grown are largely picked from migrant workers who come here from Latin America to pick them. These things are often overlooked within the appeals to go vegan. It's not very critical assessment of the social conditions. As well with animal rights, it's the idea, again, I think you all know what animal rights are. But just asking ourselves, is it really better if we're going to be integrating non-human animals into this, I would say, corrupt legal system? There's plenty of rights for humans, really basic rights that are all the time disrespected internationally. Access to clean water is largely overlooked. So we have to ask ourselves if we're appealing for rights, what happens when they're not respected? And a good quote from Patrice Jones, using ecofeminist critique of it, is to say that, with rights we have the other side of it, which is enforcement. And who do we look to enforce these rights? Are we going to again look to people with guns, to prisons? Is that really liberation? Is that really social change? And again, is this how we imagine justice? So again, how do we integrate this? And I think this is again a great quote by Noel Redman from the book 500 Years of Resistance. And so essentially what he's saying here is that, anger is great, and it's good to know what we're trying to get away from, which is a lot of speciesism, animal exploitation, but we have to be very clear about where we're trying to go to and how we're going to get there. Because if we're not doing that, we're essentially going to go in circles and end up perpetuating a lot of these systems that we're trying to get away from. So applying it, so how do we organize? For conferences like this and other things, we have to think and actually try to change things of who are here for these conversations and who is not here for these conversations. As well, instead of always appealing to say that, people should be coming to these events, we could try to ask ourselves, why aren't we going to their events? Their events for campaigning for whatever. And again, with the land acknowledgement at the beginning, just remembering that we're organizing on stolen land. So how do we decolonize? McGill University, it's named after James McGill. It's documented that he was a slave owner, he was a fur trader. Just remembering these sort of things, we're organizing on very oppressive history models, so we have to account for that and not forget. And again, with intersectionality, doing it not in a way that's tokenizing, where we're just trying to bring in more numbers. It's actually sincerity, where we're trying to show active solidarity and allyship with different communities. I also think it's really important to move away from the Messiah complex and a lot of organizing activism, where we try to look for leaders and how we do things. And I think what this quote says is that, our freedom, our liberation has to come from ourselves, and that we shouldn't be looking to others to deliver that for us. And what we organize against. So again, are we looking to the wider scale of what's going on, or are we just going to be looking at the face value, the more cosmetic issues? So again, an example of that would be, targeting brand names and workers instead of actual systems like consumerism, capitalism that are really driving this. And when we can drive out one business, another is just going to pop up somewhere else. And yeah, just again, the role of capitalism for where we value what's effective by almost how fast it happens, which is very bent on logic of capitalism, where we say that what's effective has to be fast, has to be efficient. And I think the quote from Bell Hooks illustrates that really well, where it says, she says, we can be really easily convinced that changes have happened when, just because of the society we have, where we think something's changed, but we have to be very critical of whether things are actually changing. As well, just idolization of activism, where it's capitalism, where we have to almost defend how much we contribute to the movement by how much we work, which is again really problematic and is really a barrier to practicing self-care, where we're allowed to take breaks and care for ourselves and our communities. And what we organize for. So, what are our goals and why are we here? I think good examples are Haudenosaunee. They talk about 7 generations. So they think, what were our ancestors 7 generations ago? What would they think about the things we're doing and how we're doing it? And for the next 7 generations, how are we acting in a way that is going to be liberating for those future generations? Generation 5 again talks about doing things for the next 100 years. And again, another quote from Anastasia Yarbrough, where she's just kind of pointing out that there's always a big emphasis on critiquing and deconstructing in animal rights, which, while it is important to kind of recognize what we're fighting against, it's also important that we're offering solutions that are constructive, so that way it's empowering and not just solely based on that negativity. So yeah, where do we start with these things? I think it's just important, list just, condemning behavior and not people, whether it's with the retributive model or with people within our movements, that it's, behavior and people are different. Unpacking our own privileges on how we talk about these things and how we approach others who aren't where we think they should be. And yeah, just not endorsing any particular strategy, because communities are different. What has worked with some of the activism I've done in my community wouldn't work in another community for various reasons. And the final quote, Octavia Butler, I think summarizes a lot of this stuff about transformative justice. It can be intimidating to think about developing a whole new system of justice, but they point out here how it's, all activism is fiction. We're imagining something that isn't here. We're trying to create something that doesn't exist. And so we do that all the time, and it's something good to create something that's not yet here. Yeah. So can we imagine justice like this? Yeah, so that's it.
Although we definitely have trespassed on our time, let's, anyway allow 2 questions, because that was a great presentation to end the conference. Yes?
I attended a workshop with Melanie Joy. I don't know if you are familiar with her work.
Mm-hmm.
And of course she's focused on making carnism visible.
Mm-hmm.
And she also said that we vegans, for those who try to promote an improvement of the animal condition and animal rights through veganism, of course, shouldn't put ourselves like a huge burden. We don't have to be perfect. Of course, we have to be aware and we have to be conscious of all the other issues, like wearing clothes imported from exportation in China, and eating fruits that are non-fair trade, and we have to be aware and conscious about that. But the good things that we are doing are not going to be erased by our wrongs, by the things that we need to improve our awareness on. So I don't like people to undermine veganism just because I'm wearing synthetic shoes made with oil, for example. And that stuff, and that's the only thing I find a little bit problematic, because we cannot focus on everything at the same time. We have to be simple and be straightforward, and it's already complex the way it is to promote veganism.
Yeah.
And we have to make it simple. It's the only thing I kind of found it's interesting, and yeah, it's important. But how do we put all these points together?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So my approach to it, with the complexity of it, I think it's always important to listen more and do more reading. So just respecting that it is complex, and that that we should be aware of that before we try to almost go out and say we have some kind of solution. Because I feel like that is really common with veganism, where people feel like they've sort of, they've had an epiphany where they feel like they understand things a lot better, which is true. But just recognizing that that's not really the end goal. It's part of the journey. It's not really the final destination. So, yeah, it's definitely complex, and I guess that's why I sort of emphasized at the beginning that, we all create harm. So it's, being born into the society, you're going to be creating harm in different degrees. And so it's, it's being, showing, self-care for yourself, patience, that say that I'm going at my own rate to kind of change and become more informed. So, it's a process, I guess. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I have a practical question.
Sure.
I understand the basic point that we all create harm and that we're all trapped in a capitalist system that forces us into roles that are oppressive. But we also live in a real world, and I just wonder what you would say about intervening, even using the corrupt legal system, and conceding the point, to prevent terrible harm. For instance, take the case of Michael Vick, who was not a poor, oppressed guy and was doing wretched harm. Do you actually seriously advocate not using the legal system to prevent that? Or?
Yeah, like
But I'm just using that as an example.
yeah, like it's a really important consideration. Like, sort of how I would approach that is it's the same when people say, well, with factory farms, like, do you want to just abolish them tomorrow and set all the animals free? It's recognizing that our communities and our societies don't have capacity for those sort of things yet because it's so firmly situated on oppressive models, and so that's not something we can just say tomorrow, well, we're going to abandon the criminal justice system and as well as abandon factory farms. We have to actually first recognize that they are completely inadequate systems that really perpetuate these cycles, and then start developing things that are functional alternatives. Because ideally, with a transformative model, we would have less of those sorts of examples where people do atrocious things. Does that make sense?
You're saying there's a transition.
Yeah, I guess so. It's not something we can do tomorrow, right?
And in the meantime, we use the tools that, however imperfect, are available to us. With a critical perspective on them.
Yeah, I guess so. Again, I see it the same as like treatment of animals. It's like, what do we do with all, like, the billions of animals that are living today? It's, how do we care for them? How do we care for each other in these systems? It's
Well, what we can do within the limits of the system is stop eating them. That's one thing we can do within the limits of the system.
right.
While working to change it. But it seems to me you need a transition plan.
Yeah, right. And again, that's what I was trying to illustrate with the transformative justice model, is that it's developing these kind of pocket communities that can start to practice and manifest what they're actually talking about. So instead of always basing it just solely on theory, it's actually putting into practice within their local community. So.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're gonna have to close this like that because we have time constraints on the room rental, and McGill is just not super comprehensive in staying in the room longer than we're supposed to.
I was just saying before also at the same time that we're finishing, can we also thank Michael and Allison for filming the whole conference?
Yeah, well, I wanted to do it. Thank you both. What I meant to say is we're just going to do a closing note, all the presenters, all the organizers together. And we're...
Yes. Sorry? Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you so much, everyone, for presenting, for attending, for helping, for just doing what you're doing in your own communities. We are so happy that this conference was possible. All 5 of us, we worked for around 8 months to prepare this. So we're really, really happy about this weekend. And we highly encourage those who were here this weekend to think where the 3rd conference could take place, because this is next year right around this time. And somebody's going to have to organize it. And please contact us if you feel like...
Oh, no, I have something to say about it. We already have a lineup. No, it's a joke. For the student for critical animal studies. Oh, is she gone? Kelly.
What?
Okay, she just left.
Yeah.
Kelly and Chloe Taylor are thinking about organizing it in Banff, Alberta, to make it go on in the west instead of the east. It's not. They're just thinking about it. So if you are also, we can have a lineup. Anyway, there are multiple years. so Dylan.
Yeah, so there were so many great papers here, and a lot of presenters I know felt cut off, like every conference, or talked about afterwards, like, I wish I could have put this in, and there was just so much great here, and we're all still developing, and CAS is developing, so I thought it'd be really great if we could collect as many papers as possible, or people that presented, if they want to take the time to write a paper, and perhaps didn't, and publish the conference proceedings. So right now, it's me and Christian will co-edit. We'd like to have at least 2 other co-editors for this, and kind of deadline-wise, we're not incredibly sure what we're thinking yet, but we'll just get all the papers in, go through, look at them, offer some feedback if possible, and then go and sequence them and hopefully publish the conference proceedings. We're looking at least publishing it through the Institute for Critical Animal Studies as something available for free online. If not, we're thinking maybe publishing a special issue of the Journal for Critical Animal Studies devoted to this. And so there's different things to look at, but we'd really like if people would consider either sending their papers in for this, or if people would be comfortable adapting their presentations into a paper that they could send in. And so...
Thank you. I think it would be great.
Like, c'est avec ça, je
Non, go. C'est ça. Je voulais dire, oui. I wanted to thank Michael Sizer and his wife Allison for being here. Can you write your YouTube channel, because it's really
Sure. Yeah, I'll do that in a second. Yeah.
Okay, it's really amazing to follow his YouTube channel. You can stay in touch with all the social and animal justice event in the area of like Toronto and. But you're not in Toronto.
No, well, I'm an hour west of it, but
okay.
I go often. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And
very,
before, okay, you have something to say.
Sorry. Very, very briefly, she gave me a moment to add something, and I think it's very important. The power of social media and the availability of access to blogs and things like that is incredible now. I'm not going to, I had a great way of telling you all that, the nice story and everything, but I'm just going to get to the point because we're so late. So next time someone says to you, oh, Twitter, yeah, like I care about what people are eating for their breakfast, say, yeah, but you know what? When I take a picture of the pigs in the truck as they're at the stop sign on the way to slaughterhouse, that reaches a lot of people. So I've got to, and I'm not trying to plug my film, but I want you to keep that in mind. And I have a film online about citizen journalism. And if you consider the effect citizen journalism had, say, in the Arab Spring, you know, when you consider that power, I really feel we need to bring that into our movement. So that's what I wanted to say, something for you to keep in mind. And also, I made a 3-minute video, I don't know if I can show it or not, of the protest yesterday. So I don't know if you want, do we have the time, or is it too late?
Can you put it on as people are like,
yeah, we can do, yeah.
Standing up, putting on their coats?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
I just want a picture of one.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
So, I guess I guess that kind of ends the conference. Please pick up all your things behind you because we need to leave the room super clean. And again, thank you so much. And we can, if you guys want to chat, just chat, but not in the room because they're going to come and want to close the door.
I have one thing to add. Well, first of all, it's great to hear all the presentations you did. The other thing, this is an announcement specifically for people who live here in the city. Some of you may know about Cause for Paws, their really great no-kill cat fostering adoption program. And they post this weekend about a bunch of cats that they're trying to rescue from a high-kill shelter. So if you live in Montreal and you'd have space to have one or more cats stay with you for a little bit, I would encourage you, if you go on their Facebook page, they have details there. Cause, C-A-U-S-E, for Paws.